I was thinking we would start with kind of the book and some wrap up on kind of the series, and then I was thinking we'd kind of end on the movie so that if anybody didn't want spoilers, you didn't have to feel like the whole session wasn't for you or things like that. So um we can pause at one point and go, okay, we're going to start doing some spoilers. We're going to talk in enough detail. If anybody wants to drop, respect that decision so that folks um, can not have it spoiled for them. All
No
right, well,
worries.
let's jump in. Thank you all for being here. It's good to see everybody. I'm gonna have withdrawals when this is over, I think. But while we're here, let's enjoy it. Starting with, I can't remember who hadn't read the Odyssey before. Like this was reading it in the group. This was the first time.
It was for me.
Okay, so there are at least a few people. I was a little bit different than normal. We don't have new sections, so I don't have something to read to start off the oral tradition. But I wanted to start with the folks who hadn't read it before to get a sense of what like how it did or didn't meet your expectations. What were you thinking coming in kind of about the book and about the experience? And having sat with it, having read it, having put all of this time into it, at this point, like 8 hours of your lives, like with us, and a bunch of time, reading the book, whatever chat GPT, like what did you make of the experience and kind of did it meet your expectations?
But certainly did for me. I was first surprised how easy it was to read the version. And I had no idea. I was expecting something more complicated. And I'm from Brazil, so English is not my first language. Um, but then I think the complexity of the story, I mean, everybody says, oh, it's a simple story, but it's so much complexity that you can see from so many different angles. It is just very interesting. And then to top it off, I was listening to the rest is history. They have two sessions on the Odyssey, and the whole barbecue thing that is really funny. So you can go into so many directions. I think that is fascinating.
Thanks, Lena. Great points. Anyone want to build on that? Marcus?
Yeah, I'll share. So I hadn't read it before, but I feel like it read very easily, and I don't know, I guess it wasn't anything like wildly out of my expectations. And I'm familiar with other like ancient Greek works, and I'm familiar with the historical period, and obviously familiar with a lot of the micro stories within this, just from general culture absorption. So like, I don't know, it felt like meeting someone who you've heard about, and they sort of like, they're sort of like how you expect them to be.
I love that. It's like it's such a big, like you said, it's so in the culture and you hear references all the time. It's impossible to think that you like wouldn't have heard of it. Um, but at the same time, it still feels like kind of meeting somebody new. The reputation precedes them a little bit, but there's a lot new to unpack. I love that. And welcome, Alex.
I think you.
We're starting with the folks who hadn't read the Odyssey yet, and kind of doing a recap of kind of like how it did or didn't meet expectations going in. We have quite a few folks who this is their first time reading it through.
Okay, cool. I read it, but a very long time ago. So,
Julie, did I see you coming off mute at one point?
This is my first time reading it, and in some ways I thought I didn't have expectations, but I guess that I did because, as I said in some of the early sessions, it surprised me at several points, like just like all the little details, like a lot about as a writer, like just perspective as a writer and how these various people who wrote this, uh, how they wrote and the little things that really stood out, the little details. And Yeah, I think it surprised me at several points. And because I mainly did the reading like not all at once, I feel like I would really like to read it or listen to it um like within several days or a week or 2 weeks, like rather than just I think I would get a whole other sense of it. And just another thing that was new for me that I really appreciated the encouragement here was I listened to it and I read along at the same time because I'm just, like, where's my handy dandy pencil? Like I like underlining, I like being able to look back, I like to put lots of question marks. And so it was a new thing to be read to and to read it, and I really enjoyed that.
I'm so glad.
Yeah.
Anybody else who read it for the first time want to weigh in? What about those of you who had read it before? Did anything in this kind of new reading change for you? Like, when did you read it? Was it like a high school assignment? Had you, sat down one time and, read it through, but without a lot of thought? Like, I'm curious, what, if anything, changed about the story, kind of on a reread?
Yeah, I read it in university. My degrees are in sciences, but I'm a kind of a big nerd, so I did a minor in Greek drama. And the so reading like the Iliad, Odyssey, Aeneid, all that stuff was part of curriculum, and I actually did it. I liked it, but I read it quite quickly, right? Because it's like in university, it's just like being like like drinking from a fountain, like from like a fire hydrant, right? Like there, you just have so much work. You really can't. You can enjoy it to some extent. You go, like, oh, I got a little bit here and there, but you're just reading it so fast, and you're only reading it for like very specific purpose. That this time was completely different. And actually, about halfway through, I thought, oh, this thing is like came from an oral tradition, so I'm actually going to try listening to the audiobook. And that was actually very cool. I didn't expect it to like it as much, um, because I actually don't love the reader as an actress. So I thought that was going to irritate me, but after a little while, like it actually turned into a very cool experience. Like picturing it in my head was actually different than the first half that I read. Like actually hearing it was I thought was very cool, and I'm going like, oh, I get it now. Because like when you're reading, like sometimes you'll stop to look at something, and you break up the rhythm and you break up the pentameter. But when you actually let it flow, it was super cool. So that's what I got out of it.
It's interesting that many of you use it like that, listened and read, or some combination of. This story of kind of all the things I've read, I do think really lends itself to both, and that I think you do get a very different experience with each one. Kind of like the oral tradition, the story kind of pouring over you, the images that you conjure in your mind, and for me, like the reading detail is very different. Of like, I just picked up on so much more when I read it. Like there'd be like a one little reference or one word that, like, if someone's just reading and they just keep going, you sail past. And I was like, man, what is that like Lapith centaur thing about? Like, I don't get that. Like, what's that story? And then you go deep on it, and then I'm in the British Museum, and we're walking through. I'm seeing the Parthenon marbles for the first time, and they had like an entire thing that is all of these images that apparently, like, circled part of the was it Pantheon or Parthenon? I always get those two confused. But like circling, and it's like it's just a bunch of images of men fighting centaurs. And you're just like, oh my gosh, people used to walk past this every, like, this is a story everybody knew. And it made like the trip to the museum so much more interesting because it came, there's like stories that I had like paused to research from the book. And I did that reading it, which I never did when I had listened to it. And so I like putting those two together. Max?
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, so I read the Odyssey. I think it was like the bar like some old Barnes and Nobles translation, like when I was young, and I don't even remember it. And then I read the Fagles translation only like maybe a year or two ago. And then, reading the Emily Wilson translation this time was really cool. And like for me, the biggest experience, well, one of the biggest experiences for me is like just the importance of translations, like or and the different impacts that they have, right? Like even with Emily Wilson, right? She says like Odysseus is a complicated man. And I thought like when I read Fagles, because it's everyone loves the Fagles, and that was a great read. But like Emily Wilson's read was totally was like totally great, but like in her own way, right? And now like I'm looking at the next translation is like Daniel Mendelsohn, and I was like, oh, maybe I should read that, and like because that might be different, even though it's the same story, and I know everything like what's gonna happen, but it's like it's crazy. Maybe to your point too, like those little details. They're like they just catch you, and this is the first time like in kind of my reading experience that like I've begun to notice like, oh wow, these translations are really they're actually important and they're meaningful, and you're hearing it from the voice of the translator, and they're applying what they think, and then and then it's kind of changing the story, or at least your vision of it in some way. So that I thought was really cool this go around with everyone.
I absolutely love that, Max. Paul, you want to add to that? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd read a good chunk of it, but also way back in college, and kind of like Daniel was saying, it was in part to be pretty quick and to be able to kind of just understand it and write a paper or two or whatever. So it was nice to spend more time with it. I think what really struck me this time, kind of reading it in full, and then also maybe just difference in time of life when I'm reading it, is like how much of it is about the telling of stories, you're kind of the meta quality of it, and the various bards who are at these palaces, and Odysseus hearing his own story, and then him making up stories which maybe are true or not, and uh just interesting in a way, especially in contrast to like the Iliad, which seems a lot more straightforward, of uh just kind of that element of it, and I really enjoyed that this time.
Travis.
Yeah, so I'm also one of the people who read it in college, the Fagles translation. Um, I don't remember enough about my impression back then to really know how reading it this time felt in a different way, but I do feel like I appreciated it more this time. I don't know if that's the translation or 20 years later or what, but it was I think enjoyable to read, and I think I got the impression of kind of a different perspective almost also reading it.
It strikes me, I'm curious, to Travis and Max, your point of like different times in your life you read different translations, the combination of like I'm kind of curious to like read this 10 years from now and go like what in my life has changed and what now is relevant to me. I could see reading this as like the things I remembered from my first read, which when it was like in my early 20s, was like I just remember the adventures. Like I remember the sirens, I remember the Cyclops, I remember some of those things. And this time I'm like, oh my God, the psychological drama of like trying to return home to your family and like what lengths wouldn't I go through? I would go through the same things to try and get home to my family. And, how could I have read it that way 20 years ago? It would have been impossible. It's like, and then the complexity of just like and the ambiguity in the story. Which characters jump out to you and kind of what you think about Odysseus. And I think like so much of that is like when you read it, how you read it, and the multiple perspectives. Like why I'm really excited to read the Penelope ad for the next salon. Which is posted on Interintellect now. So if you guys want to reserve seats, there's still some free seats left for members. And then if you're not a member of Interintellect, you can just buy the ticket. But the this and the movie, which we'll talk about later, it's like everyone who reads the story has something else that sticks with them and bothers them, or they need to explore, or they need to explain. And so you get these books, you get these movies, you get these adaptations. Nothing is just like a straight retelling of the original story, right? Like Fagles has a point of view, Wilson has a point of view. There's a bunch of different uh, angles to it. And like you really do benefit from multiple rereads of the same book and with different translators in a way I can't think of anything else that I've read that has quite that same feeling to me as the Odyssey. Which maybe anyone want to add anything more about that or expectations? Otherwise, I have another question kind of riffing on that. Well, I just the whatever I was going to go with that is Julie had asked the question at the last session, and it really stuck with me, which is like, why do you think the story has lasted so long? And what I had just said in one of my answers, is like I think it's there's endless interpretation. There's so much ambiguity in it that there really is kind of endless interpretation. I think that in its own right adds something, but I'm really curious to hear from you all now that you finished the book a month ago, you've had some time to reflect, maybe you've seen the movie, like why do you think this has stood up for so long and why it is still um so a part of our culture to Marcus's point that you feel like you know it before you even read it?
I've got a thought on this. Because I feel like it's the story that like really captures this heroic age, right? And the like the time it takes place and the time that it's being told is like just on the edge of like prehistory, right? So it's like just on the edge of like the written word and spoken language, and like we're just like barely getting these like glimpses of like the past of what human beings used to be like before like we had tons of written records and tons of archaeological evidence, or like we're hearing these like almost like dreamlike stories of what the past used to look like. And there's like no other way to know what happened than besides this one thing that has come down through time.
I love that. I hadn't thought about it that way before, Marcus. That's super interesting. What else do others think? Maybe another way to say this is not only why do you think it lasted so long, almost 3,000 years, but also another way you could think about the question is what do you think is going to stick with you? What, like a year from now down the road, whatever it is, maybe it's the same answer, maybe it's different than why it's lasted so long, but what is it that makes it sticky?
Perhaps it's sense that although it's a story of heroic adventures and values at that time, it's still a story of a man wanting to go back and feel, perhaps regain the importance that he had as king of his small kingdom. So this whole very personal aspect of the story as well. You have, I think, what Marcus said. I mean, the whole environment of a world that was changing, and on the other hand, you have a very personal story underlying it.
Yeah, weaving two great things together. We love a great personal, like we love a great adventure story, the hero, the man, what he's actually going through, and then also this historical context combined give you two great sticky uh pieces that work very well together. Julie, you're on mute.
I think another attracting element of it is, it's, you know, persevering through trials. It was like, it is such a perseverance and in service of home and family. And then it has a little bit of what we would maybe call magical realism, or or magical with some of the elements that are fascinating, the Cyclops, the sirens. And there's a lot that's evocative, which is a whole other thing. I mean, like just the concept of the Trojan horse. Something that looks one way on the outside, but it's very, very different and it fools people. And the other one that I've used in my life so much, even though I had never read the story, is the story of the sirens. And like here was this man, he wanted to hear it so bad and that he was willing to go through a type of torture, and he was tied to the mast, and he was willing to do that, and he said to his men, like, don't obey me when I cry to be let go. Don't obey me. And there's just something very rich about that for me.
Max, please jump in.
Yeah, no, that was great. Yeah, to Julie's point, um, I feel like the right answer is like the hero's journey, right? Like that's what you got to say about the Odyssey. But yeah, I think there's more to that. I think it lasts for so long because there's like these values that are just that you're learning from all the time throughout the story. Given that if they're familial and there's piety, there's all these things how to to be a father, to be a son, to be a wife and committed, and then yeah, and then things like yeah, like the scene of the sirens as well, right? And so yeah, I think there's like just all these things that we can learn about values, good or bad, right? Different ways, like the hubris of when Odysseus, what Odysseus does with the Cyclops, um, but we can just continue to learn from such an old story, and it's so relevant anytime for us.
Yeah, I feel very similarly about the perseverance, the endurance, like some of the things that you can learn from it. And I'm sure it's just like you read what you want to read a little bit, and who knows exactly what Homer or whoever the collection of people was that wrote this down were fully intending. But I do think there's something about that the questing, the like all the ways you can fail. Like I was at one point like trying to record all the ways Odysseus fails in getting home. Like sometimes it's other people, sometimes it's on hubris, sometimes he just like doesn't have complete information, makes a bad choice. Like he like and it's just like here are all the ways that humans fail in something worthwhile. Like here's all the ways that they suffer. Here's all the ways that they trip over their own feet. And yet like you just keep going. And it like and you keep persevering and you and the lengths that you can go, the things that you can overcome, like keep your wits about you type of things that even though I read it and I don't really like Odysseus, like I don't like him as a character. I think it was like a little bit of an anti-hero, as I've mentioned before. Like I don't really like him, but yet I also look at him and I go, I respect him in kind of the same way like a Steve Jobs or like pick your CEO who is known for kind of being a jerk or not like exactly who you'd want to hang out with, but like you still really respect how they like what they achieved and like what they succeeded in. Like maybe Elon Musk is like the one of the day, like people either love him or hate him or whatever it is, and he's like a very complicated figure because like, well, what are you talking about, about him? But he's got these big ambitions and the things he wants to accomplish for the world, and he's going, and like there's a certain element of that that you almost have to appreciate no matter what. And that's kind of what happens to me with the Odyssey is like I don't know that I love Odysseus. There's some fun stories, there's and that, but it just feels so human. It just feels so human to like fail over and over and like keep coming back for more. In a way that I just like I genuinely appreciate and find almost like affirming a little bit in times when things are tough of like we've been here for 8 months now together. I'm sure somebody's had a bad day somewhere along the way, and like I do think that it's kind of fun to be reading a book that sometimes it's like, all right, like one more trial, like let's keep going. And I appreciate that about the book.
Uh, when you asked this question, Grant, another question was in my mind that feels related, and it's about the question that
Please.
few people have mentioned about, maybe reading it again, or even this time was reading it again after college or something, or reading different translations. And it's the whole question about what books do you deem worthy to read again? Because that's saying a big thing. And then some people, read some books, some people read Lord of the Rings every year, or they multiple times. So I would be really curious about what is it about this book or other books. It kind of feels like we're talking about it with the Odyssey, that makes people want to read it again. And
That's a very
what
interesting
books
question.
do you want to read again?
Anybody want to weigh in? Who's got a one of those books they read over and over, or at least multiple times?
I tend not to read books over and over again because, life is short and there's like so many books. But I have a couple of sort of incomplete thoughts in my head about why we like the Odyssey and why we would go back to it. And like the whole idea of like Nostos and the homecoming is one of like the few genuinely like human like universal plots, right? Like everyone has some place or somewhere, like whether it's physical or like like through time that they're trying to get back to, right? Like it may be like like I have a bunch of friends that I was like best friends with like in high school that I haven't seen for a bit. It could be like someone that's gone away to prison and coming home. Could be soldiers, migrants. It could be any number of things. And when you come back, or before you come back, you have this like these fears, right? Like like has everything changed? Have I changed so much that I don't fit in anymore? So it's not really like like for like Odysseus, it's like he's coming back to a son that's like mostly grown. His wife is like besieged by suitors. The We know that the mother has passed away and the father is like broken, and like this is like, and he still has to like, he still wants to come home and he still has to be himself. So like this type of like homecoming is, I think, is like a very strong reason why we relate to it so well. And another sort of like partial thought is that it's like why it's such a why is something that thousands of years later we still know about, and we still like uh, why it's like why it's persevered for such a long time, is that it's actually kind of structural, right? Like it's an oral tradition. It's told in like rhyme. There's a rhythm, and it's gone through like generations and generations of this retelling. And it's like like it's honed over like the generations of having like these like repeating patterns, the rhythm, the how the stories are packed together. So like that's probably like the like literally that's why it's like persisted for this long, right? Like otherwise like if I just tell you a story once without any like if I didn't tell it to you in song, or I didn't tell it to you in some sort of epic poem, you wouldn't, like, no one would remember it, no matter how good of a story it is. Like there's like many great stories that are written down and people have forgotten about them, but this thing is like one of the few things that's just like ground in like generation over generation over generation, and very specific rhythms that work, that are tuned to like how people like think and how people remember things. And that's gone like like thousands of years, and it still works. And that's partially why I'm so enthralled with like the Emily Wilson like translation, that she did actually use a pentameter. It's not like the old like hexameter, but like when you actually, that's what I was saying, when you listen to it, you go, oh, I get it. Yeah, because when you actually when you read it, at least the way I read it. I'm going like, oh, here's something nerdy I have to look up, and I'll just like do like a side quest. And like, 20 minutes later, I've come back to it, and it's like the rhythm's broken, right? But when you hear it, you still think, oh, I'll jot down something I have to look up, but it's not something that breaks up the rhythm and the pattern of the poem.
Yeah, I love that. And on the Nostos thing, it's like that's the root word of nostalgia, right? So if you've ever felt nostalgia, there's some element of relationship to the story here of w wishing to go back to that place, that thing that you remember so fondly. Anybody else want to build on what Daniel had to say or add to on kind of why this book or other books are worth rereading?
Yeah, I guess just to add on the theme of like homecoming, I think this is something that's
Please.
explored a little bit more in the film is that a part of him doesn't want to come home and that these aren't like external, like conflicts or problems that prevent him from coming home, but he's actually seeking this out a little bit. And yeah, I think you mentioned there's like a lot of other stories that were inspired by the Odyssey, and you feel like you read it before you even start reading it. To me, that evoked Breaking Bad, which is kind of random, but there's a scene at the end where he talks about pretending to have done all this journey as a sacrifice to help his family, but it's really because he wanted to do it. He was good at it, and that's something that's explored a little bit more in the film. That he was like seeking out these adventures and like trying to not return home. But it's sort of a conflict, right? Where part of him wants to come home, part of him doesn't.
I love that because that's one of the things that I have not been able to resolve on this reading that would make me read it again is like, what does Odysseus actually want? He's narrating his own story for a lot of these, and it's like, look how hard I worked to get back here. And it's like, and you were on the island for Calypso with Calypso for 7 years. Like, were you crying at the beginning? Or you spent a year with Circe, and your men have to kind of remind you like it's time to go. Like, what's really going on here? Did you want to go back? Did you not want to go back? And we'll get into the movie, in quite a bit more detail later. But there's this. It's not surprising that people who are doing adaptations of the Odyssey make a choice to strip away some of that ambiguity and go, what I think Odysseus is doing is, struggling to want to go home and then pursuing that avenue of thinking in their retelling. Yeah, that's one that for me I just haven't quite been able to wrap my head around. Is like, what is actually going on with him when he's on Calypso's Island and when he's retelling the story of the Phaeacians? But Paul, you wanted to add something?
Oh, just on that same trend, I think Tennyson's poem Ulysses is him like years after this in old age and like wanting to go travel again. So I think lots of people kind of seeing that of like, is this really about him wanting to be out exploring and doing whatever?
Yeah, I love that. So, anyone else on to just any final answers for Julie's question of kind of what makes a book worth rereading, and if there's any specific ones that would fit the kind of Odyssey style for you? Not I should say it differently. That would in the same vein as the Odyssey might merit a reread, and why?
I have one book that I come back to every couple years, The Hitchhiker's Guide. And I think the reason I do that is because like I remember, the broad strokes of the story, but there's so many like little jokes and little details that you forget after a couple years. So like when you come back and read it, you're like, oh, haha, like you get it like fresh eyes. And I think the Odyssey does that where like you remember the broad strokes, you remember the major plot points, but then when you come back and catch all the little details, it can feel like reading it fresh again.
Yeah, that's a great one. That's a great one for that. And in a similar vein, I am rereading Sherlock Holmes right now, but I am not reading it. I listen to it while I bike. I've got these like bone conducting headphones, so I'm out on the road And sometimes you just can't quite hear if a car goes by or something. And if I miss a couple words of Sherlock Holmes, like not that big a deal. It's not like the Odyssey or George Eliot or something where it's like you want every sentence to really land and really stick with it. I don't mind if I miss, and it's like entertaining enough, but not so all consuming. I can't like ride and focus on what I'm doing, but it kind of takes the edge off on a long ride of like grinding up a mountain and how hard it feels. Like you have something to kind of entertain you, but I can't reread them all the time because I still kind of remember what happens. But like I can go back and watch it, almost like a movie that you like. I'm like, this is like comfort food. Like I know the story, I know it's fun, I know it's engaging. And so, that's much less than the Odyssey style of like looking for new meaning and new depth. It's more of like an easy, an easy read. Um, but that's one for me I come back to a lot. And then one I'm sure I will reread is I read Middlemarch last year and I really liked it. And I feel like it's one of those books that covers so many different aspects of humanity and life that being able to reread that at different eras of my life would reveal new meaning. I just enjoyed that one so much. But anyone, any last final thoughts on that before we move on? Julie, did you get some recommendations or ideas? Oh, Trey put in here, he listens to the Boston Mafia and Colombian cartel books over and over. Oh, I don't even know what those are. I'm gonna have to Google that, Trey. Julie, what's that?
Yeah, it's great to hear from people about what they love to read and yeah, how they read or listen like on your bike. It's cool.
So for the next question I have, and what, looking back on it, still, well, maybe people have kind of answered part of this, like what ideas still feel true today, which I think is part of some of the things you guys have said about what has, like why it stuck around so long. But I'm curious, like, was there anything that you read in here that just like feels completely foreign, like just didn't register, didn't had a hard time relating to, um, or just kind of took you out of the story? I'm just curious if there's anything that beyond what feels true today, what feels not true, like what is missed in the human condition as you see it, or the world today that it doesn't show up in the Odyssey.
I think maybe some of the themes of like the glory of war, we're
Mm.
sort of past that as a civilization, and only as of fairly recently, right? Even when people talk about certainly World War One and anything prior, um, the language used is pretty different, and the ideas of like trauma and thinking about some of actions like take place during war, like war crimes, that's all fairly modern. And in the movie, there's more of that lens, but in the original book, there's still this framing of war as was a glorious thing that we're proud of what we did.
I think war still a lot of glory and like fame seeking and like presidents who are in the military, like it adds prestige. But I think you're right. Like we now almost like can't talk about war without it being like understanding the atrocities and like how bad it is. And like, hey, you got your glory this way, but like we all agree war is terrible. And the raping and pillaging, that type of total war is so unrelatable. Um, Not to everyone in the world, but to like a lot of us who would be reading the Odyssey for fun and joining these calls. Like, but Marcus, please add.
Yeah, just on that point, I think the biggest change there is like we still have individual heroes in war, but like here, like the sack of Troy was like a glorious thing to do. So the war itself was glorious and we've lost that, but still there are individual heroic acts within a war.
Yeah, Travis, jump
Yeah, I
in.
guess. Oh,
I mean,
sorry, Ken.
I think going along with that, um, one that I feel like you almost don't notice because of how casual it is in Homer, but just like the slavery and the taking of slaves, and it's just not even like a moral question. It's just like, oh, this is the way things are.
Yeah, I'll add that even the central idea of Xenia is like foreign to us now. It's like, in the past it was like, this is like Zeus's law, and this is like basically you have to, like have like basically anybody that comes to your home, you're gonna let them in. That's inconceivable today. We all have locked doors, right? Like nobody just gets to walk in and like, hey, stranger, first eat and then tell me a story. That just does not happen, right? Like it seems like something that we still have is we call it the same thing. We still call it hospitality, but really it's completely something completely different.
Paul, did I see you come off for a second?
Um, yeah, no, I was just going to say, like, kind of the common thing with Travis and the earlier comments was kind of just the lack of a universalist morality or view on the world. Though, I guess that's not, that in itself isn't even universal in today's world. There's still plenty of places where people basically see the out groups as not having any maybe moral worth or not the same. So, in that ways, it's maybe not as foreign. But at least to how, certain societies or people in our political system, theoretically tries to conduct itself. It's makes the world of the Odyssey very foreign in that way.
Yeah, all excellent answers. I mean, and spot on. And um, it's interesting to think about like different ways that like Xenia or Nostos or some of those things. I'm like, I kind of see the modern equivalent. Like we practice it very differently, but like, there's such things like being a good guest or being a good host. And I can kind of, I totally agree, Daniel. Like the style they're talking about is completely foreign to what we do. But there was enough connection in my mind to kind of be like, oh, I get the idea of welcoming someone and some of that. But the slavery one, it really does jump out to me. And I've read a series of books lately where it really kind of came clear of like s slavery was not like a thing that the United States did in the 1800s, as like that's what slavery is and always has been. Slavery was like 40 to 50% of the global population for like all eternity, like for all of humanity up until literally the last few hundred years. Like it's just how things got built, it's how things got done. It's where all forms of labor came from, and like so many different things just came out of this, as if it's not like a moral question at all. It just that kind of, and Paul, to your point, like the lack of a universal morality that says like each human being's life has worth or something is just so different. And the if you go back to the Odyssey page on Interintellect, there's the picture that I picked for it is a mosaic from the Bardo in Tunisia. And they've got all these mosaics in this amazing, amazing museum. And you're walking through like, how did they afford this? Like, how did they do this? How was like every Roman house in that area have these like gorgeous mosaics on the floor? And you walk through Tunis or Sidi Bou Said, and you're just like, where did these all come from? They're like basically trash. Like you can walk over like Roman ruins and around the public baths, and there's just mosaics littering everywhere. Like they're not even like protecting a lot of them. You're just like homeless people, like people are camped out around them. Like here's like the like super important cultural heritage, and there's just literally so many they can't do anything with it. And that mosaic in the Bardo is part of why I wanted to read the Odyssey. I was like, oh my gosh, like they were impressed by the sirens way back in the day. But one of the things they really impress upon you when you walk through the Bardo is that like part of the reason that all these mosaics exist is because like slave labor was a thing. And it's like if you had money, what did you spend money on? Like what could you buy? What could you do? And basically what you could buy was human labor. and you could feed enough people, and you could control enough people, and you could do these things. And so a lot of these things weren't just like, oh, here's a master craftsman. It was like, what do we do with all these people? We have them beautify our city. We have them, beautify our homes. We lay these mosaics. And it was the first time I ever walked through a place and been like, oh my gosh, I can see it. Like I can see the effects of this view of people and humanity. And so I read the Odyssey and I'm like, man, it's really hard to square that with how I see the world today. Like it takes a lot of mental energy to try and go back and put yourself in that mental space of like what people would have been thinking to treat people that way. Um, just one related story on that. But Paul?
Oh, there's also the whole like metaphysical aspect, obviously, too. I mean, I feel like for most people, whether you're religious or not in today's world, like their idea of the gods is, so far away. Um,
That's the aspect that still like sticks out most to me is um like I still can't quite tell if Homer is using these as like plot devices, like narrative devices in the story, or how much like the Greeks then just actually thought Zeus was walking around in a robe, and that Athena and Ares were on the battlefield with them. Is it metaphor? Is it literal? Is it a story device? Like yeah, I still think about that a lot.
That's such a good one, and I'm going to use it as a transition into the movie because this is one of the things about the movie that I was so questioning. So we'll pause here to say spoilers. Spoilers coming. If you don't want to if you don't want to talk about the movie, no problem if you want to drop. Fully respect that. Or if you want to just like hear what we all thought about the movie and the different things, and then go watch it. No, with some context and things. Happy to have you stick around, but just putting in here for spoilers, especially since this will go on YouTube like all the other ones, so people can stop here if they don't want to do it. But Marcus, the gods thing is so right on there. Like one of my notes that I wrote while we were reading the book is like, if you live like every time you see owls, it's a blessing, and like you believe the gods are on your side. Like what actually like in some ways a very cool way to live. And like I've got these nesting great horned owls right across the street, and I go over every night and I see the baby owls before they fledge, and they've been there since like March, and they're still hanging around the area. And it's really fun to walk by. I'm like, the gods must be blessing me tonight. Like, the universe wants me to succeed. They want to go through these things. But I totally agree with you. I'm not sure how Homer's really using them. And I'm curious, for those of you who watched the movie, what did you think about the way that Nolan sets up the gods? Are they real? Like, is Zendaya like actually a god that's there, or is she a phantom of like the memory of Damon? Like, does he believe it? Like, what do you think about how the gods are represented in the movie? Daniel, you look like you were coming off.
I have a lot of things to say.
Let's hear them.
So, in terms of the gods, I think they didn't have enough gods, right? Like like in terms of the period from where these stories came from or where this poem came from, I think they actually do think there were gods that they were in direct contact with and ruled their everyday lives. Like even today, you see a lot of superstitious people. Oh, this happened, so it must be that, right? So it's not that far of a stretch to think that these people actually believed that like Zeus was thunder, and then like oh we had all this wind, and like like Zypher this, and we had like like these waves. Like I think that was like a very real thing to them, and like pre-science, like I think most cultures had this, or Aboriginal peoples in North America, like definitely had this idea with like Turtle Island and the Thunderbirds and all that stuff, right? So I think they thought it was like very real, and in the movies, I thought that it was actually poorly represented. Like Zendaya, I think was there, but in the book she did all sorts of stuff. She basically changed the way he looked. She turned into mentor and explained to Telemachus, what he should do, where he should sail, who he should see, all that stuff. And in the movie, it's just like all this is like kind of like maybe it's real, maybe it's not, maybe like the dude's just hallucinating, right? And I think it did Homer dirty. I think we needed more gods, not less. And I think that because they're in the poem, I think they're absolutely real, like 150% real.
Interesting take, Travis. You want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it was clearly an intentional choice by Nolan to not really have them present. I mean, I think even there were references a few times to like this person has the eyes of Athena, and you are wondering for a moment, like, oh, is this really Athena in disguise, like in the book? But no, it's not. It's just a human. Um, the characters in the movie, I think, believe the gods are there. Like this is kind of the basis of their, as they say, Zeus's law in the movie, that it could be a god in disguise. Um, I have mixed feelings about Nolan's decision to do that. Um, it's certainly not like what Homer wrote there. Like the gods were very present in the book, doing things, making decisions, basically controlling what happened to everyone. So I think it represented a kind of a different interpretation of the whole set of events.
Yeah, and building on that, you said that they reference a couple times like, oh, you have the eyes of Athena, and then Matt Damon, when Odysseus, when he returns, Telemachus says that about him, and he's like, stop looking for it in people. Like it's not they're not actually the gods, which I thought was interesting. Alex, go ahead.
I was just going to add that, from what I understand, it is true that at the time Homer wrote the Odyssey, there's a very literal view of the gods and how to explain phenomena in the world, but you don't have to wait until Nolan to come to this more rationalist interpretation. Just even 200 years or so after, when they retold the Odyssey, they thought about God in this less literal sense already. At least some people did.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Paul.
I agree with what everyone's kind of been saying about the movie. I and the contrast to the what Homer wrote. Um, I did really take it though also as like the Odysseus character in the movie had kind of like through his, you know, kind of cynicism or ideals being shattered, did not have any belief and read uh the Athena images over time as just kind of being haunted from, what he witnessed in the sack of Troy as it gets revealed at the end, which I thought was just devastating. Really powerful scene.
Yeah, I think totally agree. So I thought one of the ways that we could start, I wanted to transition for timing reasons and Marcus, I think you kind of set up one of the main differences between the two. But I thought before going to like what you liked, what you didn't like, and some of that stuff, the movie we knew was going to be different, right? We knew that you couldn't in a 3 hour movie tell the full story of the Odyssey. So before we get into like what I didn't like that got changed or that those kind of conversations which could take us all night, I'm curious if there's anything from the movie that added to your experience of the book. Like, did Nolan represent something in a way? Did he explain something in a way? Did he show something in a way that you felt enhanced the appreciation of the Odyssey in your mind in general? And the answer can be no, but I'm just curious if anybody has any. Marcus.
Yeah, I thought some of the dialogue about it was a little clunky about when they're talking about the sea people coming in. And obviously Nolan read, I think it's 1177, the Eric Klein book about the collapse of the Bronze Age, and he's coming up on Interintellect to talk about this. But like knowing what we know now about the history of the period, that this um this society that Odysseus is a part of is about to fully collapse. That's not really present in Homer, and I appreciated like Nolan trying to like put the story in its time in history and like make that point.
Super interesting. I hadn't thought about that. Paul.
Um, I took one of his major themes to be obviously kind of like anti-war. And I thought it added an interesting element in that my appreciation of it, of like, kind of part of Odysseus's delay is him, it's almost like he's, working through his PTSD for a decade and can't go back home as the movie presents it, which adds an interesting, an alternative, but like an interesting flavor to how you understand the book. I do think there are maybe a few threads in the Odyssey that, for example, it wasn't in the movie, but in the poem, there's obviously what we talked about a good amount was when he goes down to Hades and what Achilles tells him. And so you have these, and even the fact of whatever, the kind of the bad fates of everybody. Agamemnon gets this glory, but then meets with what he does at home, and Odysseus struggling to get home. At the same time, there is a lot of the poem that I read as like being pretty um, not ambivalent about what they did, as kind of honoring these heroes, kind of pro the warrior aristocracy class. And then obviously probably, throughout a lot of history as kind of a foundational text of Western civilization, you know, read by a lot of people with the Iliad as maybe even kind of inspirational for heroism, at least in ancient Greece, but probably even in later times. And so it was an interesting subversion to, at least as I watched the movie, to me, it seemed like he was completely changing that and saying, here's a story about the horrors and terrible consequences of battle and war.
Anyone else? Daniel?
Yeah, I agree. Like that, of the time, I'm not sure that there would have been even a telling of him walking around with PTSD, right? Like that actually going and like destroying Troy was glorious. Capturing like the goods was a glorious thing, and that's actually what they meant to do. Like even in the movie, they went to the first place and they basically took what they needed, right? Like, and that's what the whole story's about. So like, I don't buy that, like that there's this like character that's also like disturbed by like all the killing and the raping and pillaging. I think that's what these guys are about. And to Marcus's point, I found it super interesting that Nolan wrapped in the sea people, like and how like like hey, this is like actually the end of the Bronze Age, right? It's not, it may not have been the reason for it, but it's one of the things that, like happened historically. So that was actually that part was really cool. But I just didn't buy the whole PTSD. I'm like so traumatized type of thing. Watching Troy, like he was in Troy watching it fall, right? Everything's burning around him. He nearly gets crushed by a building. He's just like staggering around, like I'm going like, dude, run, open the gates.
Yeah, I've read several of the reviews, and I think that is a point that people feel very differently on, right? Which I think is part of good art, and the way that he sets it up is like some people are like really upset that he makes Odysseus kind of a, someone with PTSD struggling to remember, struggling to get back, haunted by all of these things. And other people are like, no, that's if you're going to retell the story and you're talking about the war and some of those things, it's a reasonable choice to make, and it felt very meaningful. And so it's interesting that that is a one of those like points that I think it really comes down to like how it hit you as you watch the movie, like as an individual, a little bit different. Marcus, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, no, I have another one.
Yeah, please.
I don't know. I don't know if it's like intentional by Nolan or if it's just the medium of film, but I feel like his crew in the book is like sort of faceless and sort of nameless. But in the movie, you like recognize everyone's face, you recognize their role, and like as these guys get picked off on each of his adventures, it's a little more visceral. And like when they go to mutiny and when they all eventually like decide to, you know, uh, eat the cows and drown at sea, like I don't know, you just feel the death of his crew a lot more than you do in the book, I think.
Yeah, almost like there are accidental casualties that just kind of passed over in Homer's version. In this, it's like you watch them get eaten alive, you watch them drown, you watch how badly they want to live too, how hungry they are. Like it really does hit you in a different way.
Yeah, and yeah, I don't know if it's intentional again, but I think the multiracial cast helps with this because like that made me be able to pick out the people more easily, right? If it was, 40 white guys on a boat, I'm not sure I would have, recognized each of them, because they only had however many seconds or minutes each on screen. So it sort of helps to identify with them a little more quickly.
I saw Paul come off and Julie as well. Go ahead, Julie.
Yeah, like I shared, I'm gonna chime in even though I haven't seen the movie. Just some things that uh some of you were just saying made me think about. Well, I also want to say I miss your mom not being here. Is it Sue?
It's Sue. I miss her too. She's in
Yeah.
Alaska. She just sent me a picture of a moose walking by their cabin.
My
So,
gosh.
she's doing other things.
And is your brother here?
He's not here. He had a work event that he couldn't get out of.
Tell him that I miss them. Um, but from what some of you were saying, a thought I haven't had too much with thinking about the book is how a whole other way to read it is the like and with archetypal elements, like what's our journey if we're Odysseus? I mean, you've brought this up some, like you said, like who do you identify with? Do you identify with Penelope or Telemachus or but like what's your devastation? What's your yeah, just all the different ways that people react and who do we identify with? I think that's such a great question. And where are we trying to get back to? And have we already got there or have we not left? Or are we blazing a trail or I just think that and I have one other thing that's a little bit different. I'm always interested in what you think, Max. And so I know you haven't seen the movie yet, but I would just love to hear some of your thoughts about what it's been like reading the book and what it's been like reading it with your dad and with this group of people who are adults. So when and if you want to speak, I'm really interested.
I think
And
you're
I
looking for
really
Luca's
appreciate
input.
you.
That's right.
Yeah, for Luca. Yeah, dang it, he's not with me right now. I know. I would love to have him on to
That's
talk about it, but
Luca. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
he, he definitely enjoyed it. Yep, we got all through it, and he liked it. He's excited. So yeah, unfortunately, he's not with me right now.
You'll have to give him some space on your blog, Max, and send it around on the Discord or to everybody
There we go.
so we can hear.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, Paul, you came off at one point. I want to give you the chance to add whatever you wanted to.
Oh, just on your initial question, Grant, about like what he did in the movie that maybe added something or, was slightly different than the book that I liked. I mean, I think just by the nature of putting it in the like into a film, he needed to kind of approach it differently, right? As opposed to just Odysseus sitting in Phaeacia and retelling everything. And so I thought it was a cool structure. But the thing that went along with that was and this is a little bit to Marcus's point too, of kind of like what's revealed or what you focus on in watching it versus reading it. Like there's a lot more probably if you take the minutes in the film devoted to kind of what happened in Troy and the journey, compared to how many relative percentage of verses those are in the poem. It was a lot more of that compared to kind of the present day and his time back in Ithaca and everything at the end with the homecoming. Um, so like obviously like in terms of reality, that's 20 years of stuff before the, kind of the short events that are at the Odyssey. But in the poem, the book, what's happening in the present day is taking up most of it. And then I thought the film, obviously was a little more balanced of kind of representing everything we hear about in the Odyssey, but actually showing it in relation to kind of the little bit, shorter focus on the kind of the first four books with Telemachus and Penelope, and then the return and the homecoming in the last four.
Yeah, I love
Yeah,
that. Dan, do you want to add to that?
yeah, to that point, like I actually really enjoyed how Nolan added the explainers for people that aren't like, big classics nerds. So like having like like the why Clytemnestra decided to like kill Agamemnon, besides like the fact that she was having the affair with like the other dude, is like the whole sacrificing of the young daughter wasn't in actually either of the Homer things. It was an Aeschylus type of reference, but like like not everybody like knows all the stories about uh, all the characters. So it was actually super interesting that he actually added explainers without actually like like talking down at you, and like so there was like a whole bunch of stuff like that, like like the explanation of like the story of Troy, and then the Trojan horse, which wasn't in the poem, right? So all these things really added to the enjoyment of the movie, I think, and added, like to Paul's point, added like a lot of breadth to it, right? Like it wasn't just like a guy sitting and just telling his story and lying to you in different ways.
Yeah, I did like that as well. The weaving it in and making really clear Zeus's law that like anybody who hadn't read the Odyssey, wasn't familiar with Xenia, could kind of follow and put those things in. And I think I had mentioned in one of the earliest sessions that that was my favorite part about um, the Odyssey by Stephen Fry, where he kind of rewrites it, and it came out not that long ago. Like because he weaves in all the different stories of all the boats leaving Troy together and how they all interact, what happens, and so you get the Agamemnon story in great detail, and you get much more detail about Menelaus, and you get much more detail about kind of even like things that start setting up the Aeneid and other pieces, and so you get this broader picture, and the it's wildly entertaining, right? Like, and it's so crucial to your understanding of what's actually happening. That I thought it was pretty cool that he was able to do that for sure. What did maybe one last one on that? What did you guys think about seeing some of more of the like, the adventure pieces, the the things that he had in the book been reciting in Phaeacia? What did you think about the way the Cyclops was represented, or any of these different things? Like, did seeing it on the screen do anything for you? Did it take away from your imagination, Travis?
I thought that part was really well done. Like I thought, even though I have my misgivings about it, the movie being basically an entirely different worldview, I think it was an amazing movie. And like you could kind of feel the horror and suffering. Um, and like I think when I read the Cyclops scene, like I don't know that I actually felt the horror in the way that like the movie made me feel it. Even though it was like heads being bashed against the ground and all these things. Um, Maybe that's also Wilson's way of writing is kind of simple, so it doesn't push that horror in the same way. But I thought that was really interesting, even where I think in the context of the movie, things had to be changed in the adventure. I thought it was quite well done.
Yeah, even though that the it wasn't like a exact representation of the epic poem, like it's very hard to hate the movie, right? Like it's so entertaining. The sound was so good. Like watching it in IMAX, it was just like glorious. Like, all the like there's like a lot of like complaints about like, oh, this thing being too woke or this, like no matter what your view is, if you watch the movie, you you're gonna like it. Like I think it's very hard for someone to like come out of it and say like, oh, I just hated that. That was just like a waste of 3 hours of my time.
The way that my wife put it, who I dragged to the opening night, was that it was a good action movie. Like that, like she liked it from as like an action, like it was big and it was cinematic and there were cool shots and she liked that it, was loud and, big on the screen and, but it was just like an action movie, not the thing that she would like want to turn back on if, if she saw it. So like didn't, to your point, Dana, like didn't hate it, didn't think there was anything wrong with it, but was like it was an action movie to her, which for me is like I wanted to be so much, so much more.
Yeah, I
But
was thinking that there's probably less than 1% of the people that watch the movie that are like us, right? That's why they needed the explainers in the first place, right? Like there's not like it's not like a movie made for like Homer nerds. Like,
totally.
hey, can we do the whole thing in like Homeric Greek? Like like I would go watch that with like subtitles. I think that was cool, right? But
Yeah.
that's like not the audience. As like an action movie with like a superhero, it's awesome.
– have you all noticed, and I haven't written any of them down, but I am seeing references to Homer and the Odyssey separate from the movie in many, many places the past 6 months or 8 months. Are other people noticing that? Looks like you are, Grant, but it just seems like something in the culture that people are talking about the Odyssey more.
I think I'd be really curious if that's actually happening or if it's that like
I know the
you
bias.
heard it silently in the background and never knew what it meant, and then once you know what the sirens are, the things that immediately recalls that, the book. But that's a very common thing to happen when you read a story like this, is like it's so foundational to so many different things that all kinds of references start making sense and you start seeing them everywhere in ways that you hadn't before.
Yeah.
But Travis, you had your hand raised. I think you wanted to add a point to the last thing we were talking about.
Maybe, I mean, I might be a little bit too going to the side, but um, I actually thought of the movie as much more than an action movie still. Um, I think if you go into it wanting to see Homer's story exactly recreated, like it's not that. But if you think of it as kind of in the tradition of literature and art, that's kind of a retelling and rethinking of a story in the past. Um, like this is very much a modern retelling of these events in the past, but if as a kind of thought experiment of like, what if like this is sort of what happened? Like, what actually were these characters thinking and doing? Like, I think from our perspective, it kind of makes sense. Like, it makes a lot more sense that Odysseus would have felt this way, and why he would have taken so long to get back and spent so long with Calypso and Circe, um, even if that's not the way the Greeks and Homer would have seen it.
Yeah, I thought the choice to have like Circe, I mean, obviously she can do pretty bad stuff, but at the same time, like sympathizing with her as someone who's kind of subject to these, marauding guys on ships who come and plunder and rape and all of that, was a really interesting choice, and kind of obviously ties into his whole anti-war theme overall.
That was the scene that to me I was like, oh, that's improved on the book. Like watching her physically turn the men into pigs. I mean, I don't like violent movies. Like my wife knows, like I can't watch like Grey's Anatomy. It's like it's too gory. It's like I just like I can do 30 Rock, you know, like I like the violent movies I cannot handle. Like just churn my stomach. And that scene just like churned to my stomach. And I also just like loved the representation that it wasn't just like a fairy waving her magic wand and suddenly men go to pigs, but that there was something else happening here, that she was really molding it and making it happen. And like I was like, damn, that scene's gonna read so different next time I read, I read the Odyssey. Like it really like man, I think that one's gonna stick with me for a while.
Yeah, and why she chose the form of pigs was really interesting too, right? Like I didn't get that from reading. Um, like the fact that they were like so like, like so hungry and they're so like rapacious, right? Like all that stuff was actually in the like basically symbolized by the pig, which was like very cool to me. I didn't see that before that I saw the movie.
I thought the same thing. And so I want to go back to what Travis said because I think it sets us up well for the final conclusion here is like general impressions, good, bad, or otherwise, of like love the retelling. I'm looking forward to seeing it again. Like, really didn't care for it. Um, for me, the big takeaway, I wrote a little bit about it, but like I the part that I had a hard time with is the Odyssey to me is about a man's motivation to like overcome anything and the endurance and perseverance to like get back home. And like I wanted to see Calypso. I want to see Charlize Theron like bring the heat and be like, "Do you realize how bad he wants to get home? That he's willing to leave Charlize Theron on an island? Like this guy's mad. It's like you. I wanted them to set up this desire to get home and what he was willing to endure for it. And I felt like in the remembering and some of the ways that they bring it about and the PTSD parts, it's like the motivation for the character was lost. And who he is as his witty cunning, using everything in his bag of tricks to get home. I was like, without those two things, he's not Odysseus. And so it's like I just felt like it was great and cinematic and all these things, but like the reason I read the book, the reason Odysseus is to me an interesting character, like was stripped. And like I just couldn't get over that as the movie went along. And I'm curious like how that all, not that specific instance unless that's interesting to you, but like just the general impression of like what the movie did or didn't do for you or ways it moved you um uh in general.
I think you raise a very good point because there's a whole, I think, in the poem, the whole question that she poses about, do you want to be an immortal or you're just going to go back? And I don't remember that in the movie. I don't think the conversation got to that level. It was, oh, what do you remember? What do you remember? It was a repetition in a sense of she wanting to understand. And perhaps again, goes to the point that Nolan may want to have, focused on. But I think what was very key to the story was, the immortality versus, wanting to go back and be the king of his kingdom. And I think I agree with you, it was not there.
Yeah, I think by stripping away the fact that he's cunning, like every descriptor of him has like that he's cunning, he's a good liar, he's all that. Taking that away basically stripped the essence out of like his character. Odysseus was just a man, but like really barely even that. Because like, like you're taking away the whole thing of like, I'm killing and raping and pillaging for glory, right? Like all the stuff that makes Odysseus like wanting to go home and being like, like so manly, such a big superhero. And taking away the fact that he's trying that he's like so clever, right? He did, like the thing with the Cyclops was cool. Like I want to see him like climb under the ram and come ride out, but that didn't happen. But like all those little clever things is like what makes Odysseus Odysseus, and I think that was missing in the movie.
Marcus or Alex?
Yeah,
Marcus and then Alex.
I mean, they did keep in one trick, the greatest trick he ever played, the Trojan horse. And like that is pivotal to the plot of this movie. And when I read it, that was my impression of Odysseus. Is like there was this fine line between just straight up lying and being clever. And like I think I loved the movie because I think Nolan asked a lot of the same questions I did when I read this. Um, and I think he did ask like what is the cost? What is the price of getting home with these lies, with these like destructive things that he did to other people? So like I still yes, like we lose all the little bits of that throughout the story, but I think Odysseus as a trickster is still like one of the main points of this movie.
Super interesting point, Marcus. Alex?
Oh, just to add, yeah, to the last point, I think in the film they don't quite show this like hubris or arrogance as much, right? Certainly like in the scene of Cyclops and like telling him to remember his name, right? So yeah, I think the character is maybe a little bit more mature, shows more development in the film, and less of a bad things that happen to him more specifically because of the hubris.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think it's interesting, like the different pieces that bother me. Like I was watching the Rams, like how is Christopher Nolan going to attach men to these sheep? Like he does everything realistically. Like how is he going to do this? And he didn't do it. And I was like, it's kind of a bummer. But like, okay, I get it. Like you're making a movie. Like you know, you're gonna have to make some different choices. And none of that stuff that was like different or like the Phaeacians weren't there or the South Winds was like, look, you're gonna cut something. And I'm
Or
not. I don't.
the girls hanging,
Yeah,
the girls are there.
yeah,
We
exactly.
talk about that.
Yeah,
See, we need
exactly. So
more
it's like,
killing, more
yeah,
sheep, more killing. But like, let's talk about the dog, okay? The dog was like the main character. Forget Odysseus. The dog was like amazing. Like normally in the return, there's that one tiny scene with the dog, and I was crying. This thing, it was like the best part of the movie for me was the dog watching and so on one hand, like we couldn't see like, oh, all the killing was so bad, but in the dog scene when they were picking puppies, like this one is like, whoops, this one's over the cliff. This one, oh, we'll keep this guy, he's gonna be my hunting dog, right? And that story on, I'm going, this is the main character. Like the dog is the best part.
I love that. I love that. And so I think it's interesting. Like you're right that they play up things, they play down things. Like you knew that was going to happen, and I think it's just really interesting reading the different reviews, like who focuses on which part, like what you can get past and what you can't get past. And I've seen people get hung up on things. I'm like surprised that that's the thing that bothered you about the movie. Like, it doesn't seem that elemental. And then, Anna, CEO and founder of Interintellect, like she and I in the group chat were like totally disagreeing because she's like, this is a great movie. She was moved for weeks. And I was like, I didn't think it had any heart. Like you stripped Odysseus away. And I was like, I got to the end. I was like, all right, like I guess that was kind of like a fun night out. It was a fun date night, but it's like it's really interesting how the different people like picked up different parts, and it makes me want to go watch the movie another once or twice. Like I'm sure it'll be in theaters for a while, and be like, okay, now that you're not like waiting to see what's going to happen, and you can just like really give Nolan his due and time, and like think about what he's doing. Like I think it could be the experience could change. But anyway, I think it's really funny, and maybe I'll just pause here. Marcus, please add something.
I was just going to say, especially with a Nolan movie like Inception and Tenet, like take several watchings to even understand it. So I think a Chris Nolan movie you definitely have to watch a couple times.
Yeah,
Okay, I have one final thing. The
please.
like at the very last scene, he and Penelope sail away to the south with the setting sun. Are they alive or dead? Because symbolically, like sailing west like that is actually like like is dying, right? So I'm wondering, like with like Nolan, is this the thing that basically like they're murdered? Because like just the scene before that, he was like kind of like on his last breath, right? He had all those arrows in him, and Penelope was holding him, and it's like, and then that's the next transitions. The next scene is like basically, and when I saw that scene, I'm going like, they could have done that in the first place. just got in a boat, went west, and we could have skipped the whole movie. So I want to hear from you guys. Did he die or no?
I hadn't considered that. Like that it had never crossed my mind.
I think it's kind of like the spinning top in Inception, right? Like, what's going on? Like, I actually don't know what's going on. I think that he may have died, and he was like sailing towards like the Elysian fields.
I will watch it again and think hard about that as it when I watch the end. That's interesting
Let's
take.
go, nerds.
That feels very Danny. You should write that up because I don't think I've seen a single review mention that.
Yeah, let's go, nerds. Let's see what we think.
That's interesting. Well, we're at 8:30, and I know that means it's getting late for many of you on the East Coast. Maybe I'll just open it up and go like, any last comments about the movie or anything about the book or anything that you feel like you want to share because this is our last one before hopefully I see all of you back for the Penelope ad in September.
For those of you who don't know it, a poem that I've known and really, really liked for decades is Ulysses by Alfred Lord Tennyson. And it's really, really great. And I just want to read a couple of lines. And it's his own take on what Odysseus is about. But there's a couple of lines at the end of the poem that go, I'm just going to read a couple. It says, "Come, my friends, 'tis not too late to seek a newer world." And then another one, he talks about sailing off into the sunset, into the western skies. And then the very end, it says, and some of you, Daniel will know all about this one, I think. "Though much is taken, much abides. And though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, we are. One equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield."
So classic. And Julie, I love the ending of an oral recitation of a poem for the journey that we've been on. I think that's great. Not to yield. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else want to wrap up anything or anything you want to share before we wrap it up?
Yeah, thanks, Julie. That was like a solid ending.
I love it. Well, hey, thank you all again for coming. It was a true honor to have you here, week after week. I just did this on a lark because I wanted to, have fun with my brother reading a thing. So thanks all for coming out and being a part of it. It was really great to get to know all of you. I am absolutely taking requests for future things. We'll do the Penelope ad. Looking forward to hearing other things that you might be interested in. And yeah, just thank you again. It's been an absolute delight. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Grant, for leading us and initiating this.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Grant.
Yeah, thanks
Yeah.
all. We'll talk
Thank
soon.
you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.